folks. I think we're going to go ahead and kind of get started in here. Thank you guys for joining us tonight and taking some time out of your day to be a part of our clinic series here at Carolina Crown. My name is Alex Kluttz. I am on the front ensemble staff here. I've actually been a part of the Carolina Crown organization for a minute, it feels like. I started marching back in 2008 and then kind of started in the staff role in 2015. So I'm super pumped to be here and kind of talking about some really awesome things with you guys. If you're just joining us and this is your first time being a part of a clinic like this here at Crown, really the goal of this series is just to kind of create a larger percussion community within just this activity and just in general. Since we're in a little bit of a weird situation in the country and in a weird situation with drum corps for this summer. So we're trying to showcase how we approach playing, how we approach what we do here at Crown. We are recording this and uploading this video to the Crown Facebook page, so be checking that out. And we encourage you guys, if you're really vibing with what we're doing, like share this, talk to your friends, let them know what's going on. And we'd be more than happy to kind of answer questions through that platform as well. But there will also be a moment here towards the very end where we'll get some questions from you guys kind of as we wrap up the end of our thing. Just a heads up, we're going to keep everybody's mics muted throughout the duration of this thing, just so we don't have any issues with any feedback or just anything like that, just kind of the logistics there. But yeah, so that's kind of me. I'd like to introduce one of my colleagues and really, really good friends also that's going to be joining this clinic with me is Paul Nalesnik. I've worked with him at George Mason for this past season. He's just an incredible dude, has a lot of great things. So I'll let him kind of introduce himself and give you a little background on him here.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. My name is Paul Nalesnik, and I will be joining Carolina Crown staff for next year as the battery specialist. I worked with the group at GMU this past season, so I've had some time to learn, the approach of the instructors and kind of adapt and sort of contribute my own influence as well. So I think what we've come up with is something really special and unique. And hopefully, we grab a lot of reps tonight and we're able to keep it, really engaging and allow you all to, go back and replay the video and hopefully play with the PDF that's provided as well. But yeah, I'm really excited to share some ideas tonight and hope you all enjoy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So just to kind of give you a context of what tonight's kind of clinic will be about, the title is kind of a cool title, thank you, is Optimizing Musicianship in Sound, Motion, and Feel. And I think that, some of the topics we're going to start with and kind of where we all as musicians and humans start with is developing a musical opinion and being able to articulate those things and be able to work through, how do we as humans express music and what is our opinion about that? And then how do we translate that into our playing? A lot of this is fundamental based and we'll be kind of exploring some of these concepts through that medium. But, when we're first speaking about developing a musical opinion, it's very much relating to the context of where you're playing. I think it's super important to realize that, through this lens, we're thinking about we're playing in a football stadium and we're playing with a massive horn line behind us with huge sounds. And so that maybe will translate a little differently into how we play and maybe differently than what it would be, how we would play like on a concert stage in our percussion ensemble classes or whatnot. So it's super important when we're developing this musical opinion is to understand the context of where we're playing and what we're doing and how we should be approaching this stuff. With that in mind, kind of with that overarching umbrella, it's then now know what the big picture is. Like, let's think of the big picture of the music and how we're doing it and then how we function within that. So we'll dive into that a little bit more as we get to some of the exercises that we're checking out. But I definitely think it's important to understand the concept and then know what the big picture is and then let that guide how you learn what you're learning and how you play what you're supposed to play. The second, I guess, key part of having a musical opinion is knowing your instrument. Every instrument in percussion is different, from a tambourine to a quad drum to the low C on a marimba to the xylophone. Every instrument responds differently to touch. Every instrument responds differently to the implement that you use. So it's really important to also know what instrument you're playing on and how we respond to that instrument. Kind of the next step in the sequence would be knowing what the implement is. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to kind of hop back here on marimba and talk through some of the exercises about knowing the implement, and knowing kind of just the motion around the instrument. And the exercise we're going to be checking out and using is the tried and true green scales exercise. Now, everybody probably is like, oh, we've played green scales so many times in so many different ways. This will never go away. And it's one of those things that will base a lot of your fundamentals and a lot of your music making on what you do in these skills and what you do in this exercise. So let's back up out over here. Hopefully you guys can all see me. We can get this kind of cranking. First thing I want to touch on with this, with what we're doing green scales, is making sure that we understand how the actual implement works with what we're doing. So obviously the mallet will be integral to what we're checking out, but also the actual motion and where you grab. So I think it's important when we're doing this, in the packet that you guys have, and hopefully you have access to, the first thing that we have is the green scale stock version with a check. All right, and it's really, 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 really basic. It's the simple thing of let's play a single measure of eighth notes with a single hand and see if we can get the most consistent sound. So let's check it out. We have just the first bar I'm going to do with just the left hand only and aiming for super consistent sound right now as we do it. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, and. That's all we got. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, that's really, 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 really simple. But there's about 17,000 different variables that we're talking about when we do it. So I want to talk about the first thing, which is where I'm actually holding an implement and making great sounds from. So grab the stick in the right spot, make sure on the bottom third there. And I'm not squeezing the mallet really, 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 really tight. It's so important to know that if we squeeze the mallet super, super tight, you're cutting off all the resonance of the actual implement itself. And then you're also like just working against your own body to not be able to play really, really great sound. So we're gonna go back. I'm gonna play through just the first 2 bars, which is the left hand check and the right hand check. And we're aiming for consistent sound, relaxed motion, and just even sounds. All right, let's try it again. And 1, 2, 3. So that's the basic element of what we're doing. It's 8 notes on each hand, and do they all sound the same? It's super, super important too to think about consistency of motion equals consistency of sound. So you notice when I'm playing these 8 notes, I'm not sitting here like stopping the mallet at the top of each stroke. There is a definite fluidity to what I'm doing and how I'm approaching through either how I'm approaching the instrument through each of those notes. I would love to kind of add on to this and see how we move through the different scales and what we're doing. Now, one more thing that I haven't touched on in relationship to the actual marimba, and this is something that Paula also touched on when we're talking about drums, is where you're playing on the actual instrument itself and the playing zones with that. So for me right now, I'm playing in the very center of the bar, right over where the resonator is. That way we can get the most consistent sound, and that way we can get the most even sound possible. So it's really, really, really important to find where that playing zone is so that we can get a great sound. You've all heard the thing where it's like, oh, I play on the note right over the string and I get great sound. We don't want that one. It's not going to project. It's not going to be in the context that we want. We're going to play in the center of the bar to get the warmest, fullest sound that we can without overplaying the instrument and without over squeezing our hand. So let's play just the first, I guess, 3 bars, which is the 8th note check with the left hand, 8th note check with the right hand, and then just even 6 notes. I'm all in the center of the bar. And you'll notice I haven't changed notes yet, and I'm talking about like 10 different things. So it's so important to go through this slowly and make sure we're checking off each of these concepts as we go, okay? So this is the first 3 bars. And 1, 2, 3, and. Before we even get into anything else with actually moving around the notes, it's important to remember the parts of the stroke that we're talking about. We have really 4 different parts. You have the lift, which is the prep motion into the stroke, the actual down motion of the stroke, the rebound, and then the last thing is the follow through. When you're done playing, what do you do with your mallets and how do you quote unquote release the music? All right, so it's important to know that if I am tense and tight in any of those moments, it's gonna cause some sort of discrepancy and inconsistency in my sound. Remember, consistency of motion equals consistency of sound. So if we're getting the motion to be nice and smooth, then the sound will be smooth and full as well. All right, let's go through just green scales and see. I'm gonna play through the whole thing at the stock dynamic, which is just, we're gonna say mezzo forte right now, I'm also in a basement. My neighbors might not love me beating this really, really loudly. So we're going to go mezzo forte, very even, aiming for the centers of the bars, trying to be as fluid and relaxed on all of these motions that I can be, okay? Green scales in C, one time through. 1, 2, 3, and. Again, important, just like a wind player would do this, when we breathe in before we play, we also have to follow through with the breath after we play. We have to release the music. We have to release what we're doing. Now, ignore the wrong notes in there. We're going for consistency. We're going for consistency of sound and finding those playing zones and finding the center. Now, you're like, Alex, we get that. I understand. Got it. If we don't have this step, if this isn't in place, it's going to be really challenging to start moving through varying dynamics and then being able to express yourself. That's, at the end of the day, that's what this is about. It's like, how can we express ourselves? How can we express this music? And if that baseline, if that control at a single dynamic, at a single level, at a single playing zone isn't there, it will then be challenging to move through that, right? So then we go into the next step in the next sequence, which would be, let's do line shaping with green scale. So I'm going to kind of remove the check aspect of this. And we're going to just go into line shaping. So basically, as you ascend, we get louder. As you descend in the scale, we get softer. You go higher, get louder, go lower, get softer, all right? So check it out. And again, I'm not going to play the check at the beginning for right now, okay? And 1, 2, 3, and. And you probably noticed me moving up and down a little bit too, right? And I'm not intending to do that, but that's just kind of naturally what I want to do. As I'm getting smaller with my sounds, I also get smaller with my body. That doesn't mean that I'm lightening up my touch. It just means my sounds are smaller because I'm playing lower to the instrument and I'm aiming for that consistency of sound at those lower heights. We'll talk about velocity and how all that relates here in a second too. I'm going to pause for 1 second. Paul, do you have anything to add real quick while I kind of do this next thing?
Yeah, totally. And I love how you take such a familiar exercise and add dynamic motion to it. I think that's something that's really hard to articulate in a practice session. Like we're so used to different exercises that are just at one static dynamic or at two different dynamics, you know, with an accent tap type feeling, that it's hard to really isolate that skill set of moving from dynamic to dynamic and how to control the implements as you move. And I think one thing to consider as percussionists is that, you know, with a few exceptions, you're not connected to your instrument. You know, a pianist is connected, a violinist is connected, right? A horn player, same deal. We're connected to our implements, yeah, and how we move our hands to provide that open sound is key in, you know, translating a musical opinion, right? So I think it's just important that we develop a good baseline level of facility and understanding for how the stick responds at all different dynamics, so that when it comes down to actually making a musical phrase, you're able to take all the skill sets you already have and apply it within that dynamic motion. So all great things to take a very familiar exercise and apply just simple dynamic structure to it. And you'll see how it just drastically changes how the exercise feels, and it introduces some compound variables that make you focus on multiple things at once. And I think that's really important. So as we go through the battery stuff, you know, I highly encourage everyone to participate in trying to really bring these familiar exercises to another level in terms of really understanding the movement from dynamic to dynamic, like Alex just played with the green scale. So yeah, look forward to all that, just really isolating, moving from each dynamic and how that feels and changes the feel in the hands.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Paul. I think the other thing too to think about, and I think in keyboard playing specifically, I'm again kind of, you know, doing this clinic through the lens of maybe front ensemble. And so in keyboard playing and when we're doing this, it's important to know that we have many different variables that we're dealing with. Our targets are constantly moving because our notes are constantly changing. And the green scales exercise is something that allows us to remove a couple of those variables. All right, we have notes that are right next to each other. We're just doing a scalar pattern, and we're working on that consistency of sound. Now, the next kind of phase of this would be to go, and another part of kind of the George Hamilton Green Book, and that's kind of standard in percussion repertoire, would be to go through arpeggios and be able to work through some different things. So another exercise that you have in your packet is an arpeggios exercise that can definitely help with some of that. So I'll play through a couple of those things with you guys and for you guys and talk about some of the intricacies with that one. The first thing that we have is it just starts on the left hand and goes straight up, and we'll just do the first kind of chord here. It's just our G major chord. It's important to know, and I'll use the metronome, as we're doing this, you have to move fluidly up the instrument to be able to get through the actual part and then find out where you're moving and how you're going. So the first bar kind of sounds like this. 1, 2, 3. Right? That's where we're at. Now, the thing with this exercise and kind of why we're doing this one and the way that it's written is it starts to encompass some of the stuff that's on the upper manual. Now, all of these exercises that you have in the packet should be done in many different keys. And by many different keys, all of them. All 12 major, all 12 minor, all of your different modes. You should be checking those out. That way you have some fluidity and familiarity between that and around the instrument. That's part of knowing your instrument. That's part of developing your musical opinion. All right, with this one, it starts encompassing and adding the upper manual and making sure that we're playing in the right zones. Now, for me, for right now, we've talked about playing in the dead center of the bars, right? With this particular exercise, I think it's really, really cool and really integral to be start finding where the zone placement is on the edge of the bar. Right, we're gonna start moving away from the center, and I feel like a lot of people, it's tempo oriented when we decide to quote unquote switch to the edges. And well, why do we do that? Well, if we don't practice the slower tempos, it's going to be harder to do that at maybe some of the faster speeds. So whenever you're working on this exercise, start finding those zone placements on the edge. And whenever I'm talking about the edge of the bar, I mean the exact edge of the bar. You want to cut the mallet head in half on the edge of the bar. That's going to again get that consistency of sound and that consistency of tone with all of the other notes on the instrument, okay? So again, this is the first, I guess, 2 bars of the arpeggios exercise, just in kind of our G major 7 chord here, all right? And go, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, as we're doing it, a lot of people, when they first do this exercise, will throw that mallet into the downbeat. It's like, I know where it is. That's what I gotta play. I gotta find that G. There it is. That's awesome, but that's also not being consistent. That's not allowing for that consistency of sound and building that foundation of here's what my sound is, here's my musical identity that I can start to then maneuver through different dynamic ranges. So finding out where those little problems are. The second kind of trouble spot, I'm gonna use my air quotes, trouble spot is when we go to that upper manual, we like to accent that one too. We're going again for evenness of sound. And then we start changing through some of the notes. So I'll go ahead and play this as exercise so that way we can get some playback with it right now. My tempo at the moment is 110. The slower the better, in my opinion, for this kind of stuff. The slower that you start this, the better off you're going to be. You want to start slow to go fast, to build that dexterity through what we want to do. And you're going to find this through any exercise you do in percussion. And again, without developing them in the slower tempos, you get to the upper range and adding all these different variables, our success may be more limited when we find that, okay? So this is all the way through the arpeggios exercise at 110. And 1, 2, 3, and. That first note and blew right through the first beat. All right, let's try again. And 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's, again, just working through some of your major 7 chords through there, and that's just a great fundamental exercise of being able to understand the instrument and understand kind of your emotion through there, while also underneath the umbrella of getting consistency of sound and not letting the geography, the right to left, that arpeggio momentum and motion kind of affect how we perform the instrument, okay? I think the next thing I'd love to kind of touch on really quickly here is the idea of audiation and imagining your sound and shaping, and kind of the exercise that you'll find in your packet is one that's part of kind of the front ensemble audition etude. It's an exercise called MCA. And before we even kind of get into that, I think the idea of audiation, whenever you hear me talk about that, is being able to hear the music inside your head. So I want everybody to take 30 seconds right now, and I want you to think of your favorite song, and I want you to sing it to yourself in your head. Just do that. Think of your favorite song, sing it to yourself in your head. Cool, cool. And if it wasn't Baby Got Back by Sir Mix-a-Lot, I don't know what you're doing. I mean, come on. That's not necessarily my favorite song, but it's pretty dope. It's really important to be able to audiate and imagine what you're gonna play in your head. Whenever I was preparing for recitals and preparing to play a lot, I would always do the mental run-throughs and the mental reps of the actual music to really have a clear understanding of my musical identity and what exactly I wanted to say with the music. But if I didn't know it in my brain and I couldn't actually articulate it in my head, it was really hard to let that come out my hands. So really important to think through that. Another way to think about it and to kind of think about phrasing and audiating and that idea is it's hyper related to how we speak as just human beings. There's a natural phrasing and there's a natural pause and lilt to how we speak. We don't talk like this, and we don't separate all our words and have this super monotone. Who would listen to that? We've all had that teacher that's just been like hyper monotoned for years and years. It's like, oh, I can't. All right, you guys with me? That's not really the way we want to approach music. So think of music playing like a conversation. Is the end of this phrase like a period? Is it a parentheses? Is it just like a little side comment that you make? Is it an ellipses? Is it a question mark? Is there an exclamation point at the very end of what you're doing? I'm going to kind of move into MCA, which is the exercise that we're doing. And we're going to talk about some of the lyrical things with that and some of the ways to audiate and think through that actual exercise. So I'm going to scoot on over here. Oops. Get all of my music ready to go. So this exercise, MCA, you'll notice whenever you see it in here, I'm going to play the marimba part. That's what's in the packet or in the PDF that you guys have. Jim did a great job of writing all the dynamics and all the accents and all that stuff in there, but I think there's more to the part than the thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play just the first phrase, probably up to maybe letter B, the first phrase up to letter B. I'm going to play it just kind of like acts of the tap, mezzo piano to piano, and then do some of the shapings that are written there, all right? Let's see what we got. Here we go, and a little met action. And 1, 2, 3. That was generally decent rhythm, generally an accent on Mallet 4, and we kind of had 6 notes. There were some crescendos and stuff in there, but that wasn't really the music, and that wasn't really much more than that. I know it might be a little challenging to hear with the microphone and the recording and all that stuff now, but we'll do our best and we'll try to make our way through that one. I think the important part about this one is to find melodic line and then relate everything else that you do with this into that melodic line. So really it starts with this descending pattern of we have the same thing that's repeated twice. And in music, why not change it up a little bit? Why not make it a little bit different? So the first one can be the statement. The second one can be like the echo as we're maneuvering through this part. So we have. And that's what we gear towards. So let's add in all the other melodies, the other things, and let's see if we can find that melodic line and let all of the other stuff be quote unquote our filler inside of what we're doing. All right, here we go. And a little met, and a Now, I'm not sitting here just like playing so light on the board and doing that. And I'm still playing with the quality of sound. I'm still letting some weight go into the bars, but I'm definitely making sure that I prioritize what I want the listener to hear, which is that melodic line that's descending down the instrument. Now, that changes a little bit as we go through the thing, and especially when we get to, it looks like 4 bars before letter B. Again, if you don't have the music in front of you, that's totally cool. This might be something you can reference a little bit later, but 4 bars into letter B, all of the accents in the music disappear, and we have a little bit longer crescendo and diminuendo through there. All right, so I'm going to play top to B one more time, and we're going to see if we can hear that melodic line in the beginning, then we're going to see if we can hear that pad sound and hear the evenness kind of come in at the very, very end, right before we get to letter B, all right? So again, this is top to letter B. I'll do it with the Met, and I'll do it without the Met so we can kind of hear it without that kind of a loud click on all the downbeats, which is where the accents are supposed to be, okay? So this is top to B. And I think I muted myself. There we go. And 1, 2, 3. That's kind of the opening phrase. Let's do it once without the Met to see what we got. 1, 2. It's a little bit different than maybe the first time that you heard me play through that, and kind of maybe has a little bit more intention and a little bit more meaning behind it. Now, I'm not going to go through and play the whole thing because I do want to make sure that we get to a couple of other items tonight, but that's definitely a really important exercise to check out and see what you guys can do to really make some music with that. It shouldn't just be a technical single alternating exercise. You know, kind of alluding to what Paul was saying earlier too, it's like take some of these exercises and then make them more. Add more to them, and let's see what else we can do and find that musicianship and find that musical nature to the next thing. So, but kind of before we transition, Paul, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think that's all great stuff, and I think to go along with audiation and imagining your sound, I think a big part of being able to do that with other people, right, in tandem as a group, I think agreeing on that sound concept and agreeing on how you want to sound is super important amongst the group, right? And every group has a different style, every group has a different technique, if you will, but I think it's so important to have that sound concept ingrained in your understanding of the music and how to achieve it, and more importantly, actually agreeing with the other people, right? So if you have a phrase that is maybe a simple triple roll into decrescendo triplets, all of you having the same interpretation with how fast that growth happens and vice versa, right? Is it more of an accent, right? All of that translates into a physical kind of sensation. So first, having that sound concept at the front of your focus, I think, is key in order for everyone to approach it the same way physically.
Absolutely. I kind of want to start passing it over and talk about some motion things. So Paul, we want to start talking about some check patterns here?
Yeah, sure. I think with a lot of, warm-ups, you go from broader focuses, simpler tasks to a little bit more involved, complicated material, and faster motions, and you want to warm up into it. And I think these check patterns or any sort of timing exercise is great to establish that open feeling in the grip and really allow the sticks to resonate. We've all heard the difference between holding on to the sticks too tight, not allowing them to vibrate, versus right, all of that resonance that's achieved through that vibration. We want to actually produce that resonance and vibration in our sound and our technique, right? We want the sticks to kind of feel that way. So in order for us to do that, we have to move efficiently and allow the sticks to travel with the natural energy that's being produced, right, when you throw it into the drum. All right, so with these types of exercises, I think it's very important to establish a connected feeling, right? So as efficient as you can with every motion, and you're not expending too much, or you know, it's all purposeful and all has intent, right? Every single note is super clear. So with this first timing exercise, you'll see that, and with all of them actually, there is a check pattern, you know, something that you base the variation off of, and then the check pattern, and then the variation. The check pattern, it really does relate to how the variation should feel. So, you know, the first example is the best one, where you go straight into those eighth notes, and that continues on into the left-hand variation, right? There's a sort of passing of the baton with that full stroke. So it's really important to stay consistent with the amount of sound you're producing and how that relates to how it feels in the hands responding off of the head, right? So as you transition from hand to hand, making sure you're getting the same response from the sticks, the same mirrored range of motion, right? So we're getting an efficient bounce, and we're allowing the stick to rotate, right, all the way to that playing position. So why don't we just try the first phrase of this, just 2 counts each. You're gonna play basically through the repeat and stop, right? So the 2-bar variation, or the 2-count variation, repeats once, and we'll stop on the ones, okay? And maybe we'll go a little slower. We'll go to 90, okay? Here we go. This should be relatively in the wrist. We're not really engaging the arm too much. Like I said before, we're being efficient, right? And we're trying to just feel that response and be consistent throughout it, okay? So this is the 2-count variations through the repeat and stop. Here we go. 5, 6, 7, 10. Okay, and as you go in and out of the variation, try not to change your approach or emphasize any beat. Everything is very static. You're establishing that top level dynamic, right? That your wrist will be able to articulate. We don't want to engage your arms. We're trying to really rotate the wrist as much as possible. So then we go to the ones. I'm trying to limit that range of, or I'm limiting the change in that motion, right? And I'm establishing the same range of motion throughout as best I can. Okay, so let's play it through a couple times, and then we will try a couple things in terms of dynamics and accents with the other variations. Okay, here we go. This is at 90 all the way through 1-note timing. And 5, 6, 7, and. I think one important aspect of how the sticks are moving is kind of the order in which it rotates, like what you're using as you lift. And I think with some of these notes, it's okay to kind of free up the arm a little bit. You don't want a strict wrist only feeling. Right? I think it's okay for the arm to kind of naturally finish the stroke, the very top of it, right? But your wrist can do the majority of that work, right? And I think it's important when you add dynamic motion and stuff like that to realize that as you add in the arm, it allows you to kind of almost control that top dynamic a little bit more, since there's more room to travel, right? So let's take a look at that second variation. Now we're adding dynamic motion. So this is going to be 4 counts, right? You're basically just going to contour the dynamic to the variation. So it's going to be the whole bar. Okay, and you'll do that same crescendo within that bar each, and then within the half note on the ones. And I think an important aspect of this is how you move from that destination dynamic, or from the origin to the destination. How you move that, how you shape that dynamic motion should be what you're trying to make consistent here, right? So you don't want to go too soon and then wait to the left. You want this same rate of crescendo and vice versa when we decrescendo as possible throughout all of these, okay? So a good reference is to check, making sure you're listening for how that's kind of shaped at the beginning of the phrase and how you're following through and passing off the next hand. How loud that right hand's getting, how fast it feels on the end of that crescendo. Make that the same, mirror that as much as you can in the left hand, okay? So why don't we try it, that same exercise with the crescendo, okay? So this is the second variation with the crescendo. Here we go. And 5, 6, 7, and. Okay, hopefully you're feeling the same kind of continuation of the note from that right hand, right? But it's a different feeling as you end the phrase, right? Because it gets so loud at the end. You're gonna have to produce a little more speed into the stroke. So try to achieve the same rotation at the low end, let the sticks respond and rotate the wrists. But as you get to that loud, think about that order of rotation we're talking about and kind of finishing the stroke in the arm so that you can provide a little bit more velocity in how that stroke's being produced. Okay, let's try now a couple different variations. We'll get a little faster. All right, and now we're gonna do two count dynamic motions, all right? We'll skip the decrescendo. A lot of this, I really would love you to just go back into it, download the PDF, and just explore it on your own. Come up with different ways that puts your hands and your mind in a different context and challenges you to think on the spot, right? And strengthen your mentality while playing. I think that's a really important aspect of these simple exercises. So going back into it and having the desire and the hunger to really challenge yourself in different ways, I think is really key. These fundamental exercises. Okay, so take a look at the third one down. This is going to be just moving on the variation, right? So we're going to stay low here, right? And then when you end up at that fortissimo, right? Actually, you know what? Let's go. So yeah, this is the third one down. This is a contouring one. All right, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. You're going to crescendo, end up at that destination dynamic, then decrescendo back to where you started, okay? Okay, and you'll see that as you do this kind of decrescendo in the left hand, going to be tough to manage that rebound as you decrescendo because you get closer to the head. There's less range of motion for the stick to travel. So maintaining that connected feel is super important and not stopping the stroke like this, but okay, and trying to connect the motion in between each stroke as best as you can so that when you arrive here, you can be efficient and just use the wrists, okay? So let's just try the third one down. This is the 2 count up, down, okay? Same exercise, but different dynamic motion. Here we go, 1, 2. And hopefully you're feeling a challenge of really when you decrease more so than crescendos because you're creating more energy, I feel like, at the end of the crescendo to allow the stick to respond. But as you decrescendo, getting that same accuracy, right, and motion to each stroke is really, really hard. So use this one. I also just kind of put fortissimo in here because I think a big part of being able to play accurately while manipulating dynamics is knowing your dynamic range and having a very strong opinion of that. So, I started with forte and now I expanded to fortissimo. So maybe, you just get a little bit faster into the stroke, a little more extension. And you try to feel that difference, so that you really have a strong understanding kinesthetically of what's happening in your hands at each dynamic, right? And mezzo forte and you're decrescendoing, it almost feels like you're letting go and you don't have to try as hard. And vice versa when you crescendo. So just having a strong physical understanding of all that, I think, is key, okay? Let's move on. Okay, so the decrescendo, it kind of speaks for itself. So the next kind of thing I want to do is the two-note timing. And this is less of a continuous stroke, right? And this sort of starts to introduce downstrokes, right? You'll go in from the check, and a lot of this is already known, but just getting efficient stroke types throughout this is important. So quickly to go through them, down, right? And then notice that that left hand last of two continues on as a full stroke. Right, so can we just try that much? Just down. Stop there. 1, 2. Okay, so really feel like you're allowing that check to just full stroke right into that second variation. Because the next time you play it, it's going to change the feel. It'll go down, and then it'll go back into a full stroke for the check pattern. Right, so add that on. So 2 whole bars, really focusing on the accuracy of the stroke types. There we go. 1, 2 bars, and. All right, see if you can get that full stroke from the last count of the check into that down, and then full. Super important to have that efficiency to all these stroke types. Going on, down. Right, so as you go from third variation into the next check, it becomes a full stroke. Right, so third bar into the fourth bar. Right, so you see how I'm downstroking before the rest, down, and then another set of downstrokes, and then full strokes, because I don't need to full stroke and stay up in the air for all that time, okay? So let's just try the 2s and try your best to be as consistent with when you're stopping the stick and when you're re-engaging for a full stroke, okay? Here we go. This is just the 2s of 2-note timing, so the first 4 bars. And we'll slow this down a little bit. I'm at like a 90 to 100 range. Here we go. 1. And ready. And a big tendency, too, is to kind of lift the left for too much time on the last one. So try to be efficient when you engage and go to the top of the stroke there, right? And then, as with a lot of these exercises, we just split the difference and just play half the duration. And you put a little repeat on it just to keep you thinking through the exercise. So let's try all of it, okay? 2-note timing. Here we go. And 5, 6. Hopefully you're feeling like you have to really understand where those downstrokes are versus the full strokes. And also you're trying to make it feel as similar to the check pattern. So in terms of the velocity, I feel like it's the same throughout. I'm not changing my feel before the point of contact on the downstrokes, trying to make them feel the same until after the stroke where I just stop the stick. Okay, and I'm trying to stay loose, no extra pressure, anything like that. We're trying to allow the stick to vibrate and have that resonance, as we said before, even though we're stopping the stick, okay? So now as we do this dynamic motion, you want to still feel those stroke types within it. Obviously, it'll feel a little different as you finish the crescendo and go back into the check for the third, right? For example, dun dun. And it'll be difficult to start back on that low end after that last 16th note accent. So all these great new challenges that are still applicable to the same old timing exercise, right? And it just reinforces your understanding of how the sticks feel as they kind of change through sound. So why don't we try it, okay? This is going to be the two-note timing with the crescendo variation. So try your best to pace out that dynamic motion throughout each phrase, right? So you don't want to go same. You don't want to reach the peak of the crescendo too soon. You want to wait until that last note, okay? And you can really, it's really hard to do this really accurately because of the spaces are so close between the 16 notes. So try your best to lead to that last note every single time. Okay, so why don't we try this one? This is the crescendoing two-note timing. Here we go. 5, 6. And hopefully you're feeling, I think the release is low. Hopefully you're feeling sometimes like you're in the air for too long, right? I think I played the threes that time and I was like hanging in the air for too long. And you want just the right amount of hang time between those notes. You don't want you don't want the beat to be in the air for too long, right? Or else, you won't have that independence or a natural approach to each individual note. It'll feel like one or two are labored and you don't have total relaxed control over it, okay? So moving on, three-note timing, it really kind of puts the two ideas together, whereas, the two-note has the downstrokes, the three-note has a continuous note going. The right hand keeps going for the first variation, left hand keeps going for the second, third is the right, and then the left in the last one. So trying your best to have that continuous motion into the variation as well as fitting in the downstroke between them, right? Down, down, down. And as I say it and emphasize it, I'm playing louder and that's not good, okay? So try to make them all sound the same. Okay, so why don't we try this one all the way through one time, okay, and then we'll move on. Here we go. Three-note timing. 5, 6. Another cool thing you could do quick is change the order, right? So you can go from the last variation to the first one. So you'll go in reverse order. And so forth. So you kind of keep yourself mentally engaged and adjust to the appropriate technique. And the last thing I want to do with the timing thing is use it as sort of an accent tap exercise where you're engaging both hands, right? You'll see we'll do the same thing with rolls towards the end, but the variation rhythm becomes the accent pattern. 1 E, 2 E, 4 E, up. So now I'm adding a new level of responsibility with doing those efficient downstrokes and stroke types within that sort of two-heighted, two-sound format and doing them in a way that provides that good positioning and rotation for the low-end notes. You don't want to go like this and put in your arms. You want to allow the low end to really rotate and have full articulation of the wrist appropriate to that dynamic. Okay, it's really easy to just put into your arms and lock the fingers and fulcrum. So challenge yourself when you do this to feel your wrist really rotating throughout this. Let's just try a couple of times. So this is fill in the accents for the 3-note time. Okay, try this one. Here we go. And 5, 6. Okay. And lastly, what you could do is you can change the sticking of the check. You can keep it the same for the variation. You can open up that feeling of the check into double strokes. So there's even greater of a hand speed change. So why don't you try that? Try the 2 counts of check as double strokes. Okay, at the low end, you'll see a drastic change in hand speed from 8th notes to then the 16ths. It's going to be easy for you to then forget about that rotation and the response you're getting just naturally when you're playing full 16th note hand to hand. Okay, 16th. So try it with the doubles on the check. Here we go. This is last thing for timing. 1, 2. So hopefully you're feeling like all of these different variations are creating all these different feels in the hands, right? And I feel like understanding how the stick responds and being able to efficiently control the rhythm throughout those different dynamics, whether it be 2 distinct dynamics, accent to a tap, or moving from dynamic to dynamic, really having a strong understanding of the technique and what produces the most open feel so that you produce the most open sound. Okay, that's the whole goal of all of these types of exercises. Quick, Alex, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think this is awesome stuff. I think I'd love to kind of talk a little bit about how, like, the velocity and articulation with which you're using and how even and controlled you're being with that. I think that's something that we all can think through, and how velocity and weight are all connected, and how being relaxed how having high velocity doesn't mean being tight. It doesn't mean being tense. It's so important to know that there's an activation of the velocity. I'm going to use this term and phrase coined by a super great friend and colleague of mine, Marcus Newdigate. It's called the velocity activation gate. And it's basically all it means. It's that there's a point at which your mallet is going to move really, 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 really fast. And when it activates, it's really, really important to know that the weight then has to follow through with that. And you're not working against your arm to get the mallet to move faster or the stick to move faster. And again, that's going to help you have a great consistency of motion and a great consistency of sound with what you're playing. On any surface, on any instrument in percussion, that's something that can be applied. Whether it's the bass drum that you play in the Sousa March, or whether it's, you're in the middle of the snare line. All right, so important to know that just the velocity and weight, you have to use the weight, you have to be relaxed so you can get that fullness of sound. That doesn't necessarily mean you're being tight because you're having fast velocity. So that's my 2 cents on that one.
Yeah, that's spot on. And we're going to work on that with this next page. You'll see this polyrhythmic 4/3 grid. And that's kind of the purpose of it, is to do one independence, to have this sort of tandem motion, okay, and have it be just slightly varied so that one hand is slightly faster, so that the hand that has a more open rhythm has a greater challenge to take up that space through motion, right? And as we add dynamics and get louder and softer, we're going to apply what Alex is talking about, where we're increasing the velocity and the weight through the different dynamics and seeing how we have to appropriately put it in each hand and not let it affect the hand that's playing the low end. So first, we're just going to play this exercise as is. Okay, this is the second page, the 4/3 polyrhythmic grid. Okay, and we're going to play this at around like a 144-ish, 152. And what you can do with this is make this one long exercise, but you can do this with any other polyrhythm as well, like 2/3 or 5/4, something that feels comfortable in the hand, something crazy like 7/3, anything like that. But I think 4/3 is great because it provides you a nice even amount of notes, and it gives you that 3/4 time signature. Okay, so each one of these bars is in 3/4. And what I want to try with this is manipulating each hand in different ways and seeing how that changes the feel and the velocity needed to really control the motion in between the notes is really what we're working on. Not the notes themselves, but the motions in between them, how we appropriately manage the space we have to travel. I think that's the goal here. Okay, so why don't we just try it, just the 4 bars each. So it's going to be 4 bars of 4/3 with the 4s in the right. Okay, and you'll have that downbeat double stop to mark every bar, and then you'll switch to the left hand. So right, and then left. And the right hand has the quarter notes. And then you do half that amount, 2 bars, 2, 1, 2, and then 1 bar of each. 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay, once we get into it, I want to move through these pretty fast. So just really try to focus on the rate at which each hand is moving and take up the amount of space in between the notes as best you can. Okay, so you don't want to do this. You don't want to go and have that sort of time where the beat is stopping in midair. You want that hang time. You want that connection of the beat. Same goes for the 4, but that increased rate just allows it to be a little bit more natural of a rebound quality. So try to manage the space, okay, in between those quarter notes. And don't let each hand affect each other. So let's just try it one time through all at like a mezzo forte. Really focus on the time in between the notes and taking up that space through motion, okay? Letting the beads fully respond and move back to that playing position each time. Okay, try it. Actually, let's just try the first 8 bars, so the first half of this. Okay, so 4 on the right, 4 on the left. A little slower. There we go. 5, 6, 5, 6, 8 bars. Okay, and the better you can be with connecting each note, the more you're going to get out of this exercise. If you're just playing the quarter notes like downstrokes, you're not challenging yourself to control the motion in between each stroke. Trust me, it's going to really enhance your ability to be aware of what's happening in each hand as you play normal music, because you're aware while they're playing in tandem. So now let's try the whole thing. And like I said before, let's just do like a mezzo forte so we're not fully extending. We're trying to limit that motion. And we're connecting within that dynamic range as best we can. Okay, so all the way through, this is the 4 on the right, 4 on the left. Cut that in half, 2 and 2, and then the 1s 4 times. Okay, there we go, 16 total bars. And 5, 6. Left. Really connect the motion of that right hand. Nice and open. Can't talk and drum. And left. 1 bar. Okay, and I'll talk through it one more time just as what hand is leading with the 4. Okay, again, 1, 2, ready, and right. Left. Right. Left. Right. Left. Right. Left. Good. Okay, so a along with managing the space in between the notes, you want to establish the same range of motion and pathway between each hand, right? Even though one hand is playing a slower quarter note speed, you still want that to travel with that curvature, right? And have that semicircle almost to the stroke and the beat shape. You don't want to lift it like this, right? You want to allow that stick to rotate around that fulcrum, and thinking of a curved path to the beat, I think, is a good start. Just really checking out how the beat is responding off the head. If you're lifting and kind of putting it into the drum like that with your arm, or you're letting the wrist allow it to respond. I think that's an important aspect of this. So let's move a little quicker in 140, and let's try to add some dynamics. So this is the fun part of this. We're going to play all of these soft, okay, to start. So the reference hand will be soft, and the dynamic hand will change dynamics. So we'll start with crescendoing the fours. Okay, so as you crescendo the longer phrase, you go back down and decrescendo, as you see. So 2 bars up, 2 bars down. Two bars up, off the left, and 1 bar. And you see on that 1 bar phrase, you only have 4 notes to manage that crescendo. So it's a little sooner of a dynamic motion, right? So try to fit the dynamic motion within each larger phrase, right? So in the beginning, we're going 2 dotted half notes, right? Right, and then the 2s are just 2 dotted half notes, 2 bars. We want to replicate that growth as best we can. We want to mirror the dynamic motion throughout this. So let's try this one. This is the 4s crescendo. Okay, 5, 6. Actually stop here and stop. Try that again. 8 bars. So if any of you all are really listening to my sound, you'll notice that I decrescendoed a little late that time. And it's hard to manage the same dynamic motion and make them sound the same throughout this. One other thing is try not to let that opposite hand be affected by the crescendo. Like this. Try to keep it at that low height, soft dynamic, so that there is an obvious difference in independence being built here. So the next variation, crescendo. Let's quickly try this one. Just the 4s, okay? Let's move through these a little bit. Just the 4s of the decrescendo 4s. You'll notice there's a little exchange and a downstroke there, so we're trying to put together the stroke types we reinforced before. So let's just try 8 bars of this. Okay, the decrescendo 4s, 5, 6. Okay, and as you do this, try to think about what you need to do physically to make it feel like you have a little more speed in the stroke at that loud dynamic. Because it's more than just a height, right? It's not a height, it's a dynamic, and it's a feel in terms of how fast that stick is responding. And you want to try to make that tangible in this type of exercise, because you go from really soft tap to then you want that different sensation and use those different muscle groups and try to build that sense of independence from hand to hand. Okay, so let's move on quickly to now manipulating the quarter note hand. So you're going to have more time to do the dynamics, right? There's way more time in between the strokes. So try to differentiate between those different dynamics and really be even with how you grow and how you decrescendo, okay, from hand to hand. So let's just try this one. This is the crescendoing 3s. Okay, here we go. With the metronome, just the 4s. 5, 6. And hopefully you're feeling like it's a challenge to manage that connected motion as you decrescendo, because like we said before, as you get closer to the head, as you get closer to the drum, there's less room, right, for the stick to respond. So just managing that timing of the stroke in a way that still connects from note to note is really key. Okay, let's try to finish this one out, okay? So it'll be for the 2 bars crescendo. So this is right on bar 5. So bar 5 through 8, just the 2s crescendoing in the quarter note hand. Just that much, okay? This is bar 5 through 8 in the 3s crescendo. 5, 6. And do what we said before of increasing that weight and velocity as you get to that loud dynamic. 1, 2, again. Okay, and then you have the 1 bar H, where you have to crescendo within those 3 notes. So it's a little tougher to manage that proportional dynamic motion. So let's try it now, just the 1s. And 2, and 1, 2, just the 1s. Again, 2, and last time, ready. Good. So hopefully you're feeling that challenge in differentiating between the hands, playing them like, you know, the other opposite hand isn't affecting that hand, and vice versa. You know, that's really, really hard part of this exercise. And ideally, you want to be able to, like, once you get more comfortable with it and you know, feel like you have a little bit greater control, you want to increase the tempo and try to make this one whole exercise. So it'll be 4s. And then, so just go right down the page and see if you can play it with that mentality and with the notes, you know, continuing to move forward and having direction. I think that's an important aspect of this exercise. You know, we're fitting within this, that macro beat, and we're really starting to play to the phrasing and how you kind of manage the rate of each one of those dynamic motions, right? And you know, relating that to the phrase is key, right? And knowing kind of when that half point is, half, half, and relating that to a physical feeling, I feel like is very important. So, Alex, you want to talk a little bit about phrasing?
Yeah, I think definitely, you know, echoing a lot of things, you know, to throw a little variant your way, like for our keyboard players, a cool thing with this particular exercise, set up over your favorite chord, not C major, please, something else, your favorite chord. And you can do this with the right hand. So I'll give you the kind of example here at the beginning. I think, what, like 140? So say this guy, our favorite one here, it's my favorite. So we can do a bunch of different things with different permutations, just playing the right hand and finding some of those same exact skill sets and some of those same exact concepts in our format playing. So don't think like, how creative can you be? That's the goal, right? It's like, take this very basic kind of building block of what we do. It's a hyper transferable skill, and something that just as a musician, to have that independence on a variety of instruments is so, so, so important. The other thing about phrasing to think about, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, is making sure that, I think, especially in 3/4 and in 4/4, in all of our different meters that we have, the beat is kind of king, and within each of those meters, each beat has its own kind of feel. So in 3/4, we're very weighted to each of those downbeats. So that's kind of why you have all those double stops here. It's why we're feeling that. It's okay to feel that lilt. It's okay to feel that grouping. In 7/8, it feels very different, and there's many different groupings we can do. So as you're exploring through through various types of music and various kinds of music, find out what the big beats are. What are the important things? Again, kind of zooming back out and finding our musical identity. What is the macro? What is the context? And then how can I start to feel that through to different things using this particular exercise to maybe help develop some of those things. Really, really important, hyper transferable on all aspects of percussion. Don't think, oh, it's just written on a snare drum, so I have to just do, no. Apply it to that, apply it to a scale exercise. Maybe it's just 2 different notes that we're playing, but definitely take something like this to heart and working through phrasing, working through different dynamic shapings and independence in your hands. So yeah, awesome stuff. We're gonna move on to some rolls.
Yeah, that's super creative. I didn't even think about that permutation thing. That's awesome. You said 2 different pitches. I was like, oh yeah, totally. But then you did the perms. I was like, wow.
Creativity.
Also, check out Mark Ford's practice tips on YouTube. There's like this like floor exercises video as well. It kind of does exactly what Alex was doing with different polyrhythms as well. It's a great resource. Okay, so moving on, I think another kind of aspect of kind of producing that connected motion is dealing with multiple bounce strokes, whether it be 2 or 3. The most common, dealing with 2 motions within one larger macro motion. And it's important to kind of find some exercises that maybe aren't so one-hander based, like we all know that kind of exercise, or like a shuffle. All great to reinforce that individual technique of each hand and the evenness of sound. But I think something like this could now put it together with that hand-to-hand idea we had before, and maybe put it into a context where we deal with these types of figures regularly, like duple rolls and just any metered rolls in general, puttitas, paradiddles, that type of thing. So really trying to just quickly move through the idea of multiple bounces. And we want to allow the technique to not get in the way of the stick, right? And that idea of allowing the arm to almost finish a stroke really comes back into play, I feel like, with doubles. I think there's a way to equally proportion each muscle group throughout the stroke, like the arm lifts, the wrist allows the turn and that extension, and then the fingers kind of absorb the shock at the bottom of the stroke. There's almost like this down-up kind of feeling, and it's important that once you finish the double stroke, without talking too much about it, that you connect to the next note. I see a lot of players kind of do this, where the beat stops either up at the top of the stroke or down at the bottom of the stroke. Right, we want that continuous motion. Okay, and this type of exercise really reinforces that. So with this in mind, this continuous motion, take a look at that 3rd page. It's inverted doubles, one of my favorite exercises. It starts out with just 16th notes. Sticking is right, right, left, left for 4 counts. Right, and I'm really trying to emphasize that idea of connected motions. And then you go into an inverted sticking, so right, left, left, right, right. Right? So there's almost a quicker double speed from that 4th count with that left hand into the invert. So it's important to maintain that loose quality to the 2nd note's motion and not hold on too tight, so that we get this kind of different feel rebounding off that quicker 16th note space. So I just want to try this. Let's just go. And we'll end up, okay? And try not to rush the 16ths like I did there. Right, left, left. And trying to get the same feel in the doubles, okay? We're finding this kind of pass off, right? And this consistent motion between the hands. We're trying to open up the grip a little bit so that that 2nd note has some response off the drum. If we're too closing the grip here, we're going to limit that rebound off that 1st note. So all I want to see is a bar and an 8th note, right? Thinking about coming off of the drum here, that upwards motion, after the downwards motion. Here we go, that much. 5, 6 without the met. 2, and last time. All right, now let's connect it all the way to that third bar. So you're going to invert roll right left and end up on that left hand. Okay, so 2 bars total. 5, 6, no met. And you want to try your best not to change your approach of how fast the stick moves on those singular notes. Right? You want to almost just not be able to tell which note is which, okay? And a lot of that's through the motion and not being too quick with the stroke, just trying to manage that space appropriately. Now the second half of this is off the left hand, same exact thing. So left, invert, left, right. Okay, so add that on. There'll be that quicker double feeling again in the right hand now. Okay, so let's try that. Here we go. 5, 6, 4 bars, and 5, 6. All right, and you'll notice too, as you do the inverted space, that singular note ends up having a little bit more time in the air there, right? So you have to manage that space in between the notes, just the same as we were doing with the timing stuff. So then the end of it is just 2 bars, or 2 counts each, 2 bars of that. Okay, trying to get the same feel so that we can produce the same sound. Super, super important, and trying to be as connected as we can with all the motions. Here we go, let's try it. This is the inverted doubles exercise, okay? And then we'll quickly go through some variations to end this thing off. Here we go. Ooh. And 5, and 6, and all the way through. 6, and 7, and... Okay. Quickly for quads, one thing you could do is apply this to sweeps. You can go inward sweeps and then just do that same sweep motion throughout. Maybe put the singular notes on the outer drums. Right, and reinforce that same motion of the sweep throughout the inverted sticking. That's one way to work on some sweeps. That's a great exercise. But more importantly, you're working on the space in between the notes, right? And managing that lift and continuing the motion. One other thing you can try is now accenting the single notes. So now you're starting to work on turning, articulating the wrist back, almost like a paradiddle, right? You're working on some paradiddle kind of figures where you're lifting that double to an accent. So I suggest trying that variation. And quickly, as we're kind of running out of time here, let's maybe talk through a couple of the variations that go along with this. You'll notice that there is a triplet to 16th note double variation, where the roll speed is a lot more open on the triplets, obviously, right? So we're dealing with nice open triplets and a quarter note triplet bass. So quarter note, triplet, 16th notes. And then you do 2 counts. And then check out the last 2 bars. You invert the sticking because of the triplet. So the sticking stays right, left, but the rhythm goes 1 into 2 triplet, 3 into 4 in. So you have to be inverted for that second count. So you're doing different rates of doubles almost between the hands. I think that variation is really cool. And again, it's about managing the space in between the notes. right? Being as open with that motion as possible. And then to move on, we get to more denser roll figures, like 16th notes, the triplets. Can't talk and drum. And then one count. Notice when you do the one count variations, it switches hands, right? So why don't we try this one? This is the 16th notes, 4-2-1 doubles to 24ths, okay? There you go. And 5, 6, one time through this one. I think I skipped. Try it again. 5, 6, and 5, 6. Well, so definitely, using a 4-2-1 format, I think, is really great because it just simplifies it and allows you to focus on the technique and what produces the best sound, right? And as even as possible from hand to hand, I think is super important. And then just check out the last couple of variations here. I have the 3-note timing example, so you can take the different partial variations and apply them to the rolls. So 1 EM, 2 EM, 3, 4, 8, up, 3, and a 4, and up. So you can make a roll exercise out of the check pattern exercise as well, applying the multiple bounce. Also, you can do what we did before with the accents, maybe inverse. So you can work on these quicker roll figures within the downstroke. So. Okay, great for just stick control in and out of those stroke types, and really having a consistent quality to those drags as you switch up the note values, because you have the 7-stroke, which is a nice open 7, and then you have the 5-stroke with a single diddle. It's tough to approach that with the same grip throughout. And then the last 2 variations are based in the dynamic motion we did before. So really applying a short, long kind of check pattern to dynamics. So do 2 up, 2 down. You can do that way, or you could do 4 counts. So a short, long of dynamics. Short, and then long. And notice what it takes to provide that sound. It's gonna you're gonna need a little bit more velocity and a little bit more kind of cushion or support in the grip so that you can manage all the energy you need in those rolls. So all stuff that's relatable to just really fundamental timing exercises that really hopefully will increase your awareness hand to hand and be able to really relate the feel to the sound that you're producing, and what's required in the motions to have that sort of effortless, relaxed presentation of how you're playing. I think is really important. So yeah, Alex, we want to move on to the Q&A?
Yeah, we'll do that. Just another kind of tidbit for you guys. If you look in the last page of the PDF that was sent, there's this lateral roll kind of exercise. I think it's a really kind of cool breakdown. It comes from the Upfront book. Jim kind of definitely did this, and it's in the packet here for Crown. There's a lot of great stuff in that. I'll be more than happy if you want some or have some questions about that later on. Just reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to answer some of those. But for now, does anybody have any questions? I'd love to open up the floor. If you want, type your question into the chat, and we'll try to answer them as they come. That might be an easier way to kind of keep track of that as we're doing it. So if you have any questions, now's the time to kind of shoot. You guys got our ears for the next few minutes, and we're more than happy to answer some questions. What's up?
And yeah, I'll reiterate, if anyone has any questions that comes to them in the next day or so or the week, whatever, don't hesitate to reach out to me as well. Okay, I'm here to answer whatever.
I kind of do have one question.
Yeah, what's up?
I'm kind of getting back into drumming, so I'm kind of reinforcing my technique. Kind of lost my chops over the past few years. What would be a good book you'd like recommend? Something that I can just kind of like base on along with y'all's exercises.
I think there's many good books. I think the stick control book is amazing, and that's something that the Stone stick control book. That's just like bread and butter of anything that I've done. There's a lot of rudimental books and stuff that are out there. Paul, do you have any like favorites that you love?
I think recently I've been into Joe Tompkins, Joseph Tompkins' French American rudimental solos. They're not really, it's not a method book per se, it's more just solos, but I think just putting your hands in new kind of patterns and ways of making music, I think is always great. So maybe purchasing one of the Joe Tompkins books. I think another great one is Nick Worth's Movement and Mentality. He has 2 volumes. They're more quad based, but I think it's a little bit more well-rounded of an approach. So yeah, that one's great as well. Also, Pablo Riepi has a method book. He is a New York City ballet percussionist. I think it's like 12 essential practice tools for snare drum or something like that. But Pablo Riepi has a great warm-up that's been one of my favorites as well. So maybe check that out.
Yeah, the Wilcoxon book is also a great one too. We've got that down here in the basement. It's a lot of great etudes and solos in here, and there's shorter excerpts and shorter solos to kind of work through. See some questions for tips on hand independence, having trouble with the polyrhythms like the 4/3.
Yeah.
For me, it's definitely take the exercises that you did. Slower is better. The mentality of go slow to go fast. I think that's something that we forget. It's like a lot of us tend to want to like really run into something and like, oh, I've got to do this. I see these guys checking out. They've spent hours doing it slowly. They spent hours building the dexterity up. I tell a lot of my students, find the tempo of no mistakes. Like, what's the tempo that you can do it at, and what's the thing that you can do where it's like it feels the most comfy, and you feel like you're quote unquote getting it, and then ease it up from there, and go one click at a time. The old Met game is a really good thing to do with that. Paul, if you got anything for that?
Yeah, I would say also maybe try to decipher what's happening rhythmically. So like if you see the 4/3, I wrote the first variation in like the rhythm. So 1, 2, and 3. I'm trying to relate it to like a grid or an outlining rhythm. You know, maybe the 2/3 you have quarter notes and eighth notes, right? Quarter, eighth note, eighth, quarter, eighth note, quarter, eighth note, quarter. The 4/3, all right, same thing where you have a kind of 16th note pattern. 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. The 5, 1, E, and 1, E, and trying to relate them rhythmically in a way I think it'll help. And I think to go to the next question, just how would you recommend practicing preps? Maybe, just isolating one note at a time, I think would be a good start. Just trying to get that same motion of the wrist and fundamental technique to just one note to start, so that when you start from playing position, you're understanding that that's the same kind of sound and feel as you want throughout the exercise, right? So just maybe start on one note and then do double stops and then get into the exercise. Hopefully that helps.
Breathe before you play. Like, even if you're not a wind player, breathe while you play. Just breathe. It's a good human skill. I think that's something we as people should do. All right, so make sure that we're checking that. Tips for good practicing on mallets during quarantine. That's a tough one, guys. I think that a couple of things. One, I have a story about a student that drew a marimba on a bed sheet and then put it over their bed, and then they worked on the zone placements and the muscle memory for there. Now, that just kind of gets the kinesthetics of it. That doesn't necessarily get that aural image and doesn't get the tonality of it, but it definitely gets you that awareness of the instrument. I feel like I saw like an ad in Facebook for like a Kickstarter the other day of like a tabletop like marimba that you can roll out. It's like a placemat. I'm not 100% sure. I think that finding ways to like imitate the instrument is going to be helpful. That's kind of what I've got. Talk to your local high school band directors if there's any way they can help loan out instruments. I know I've loaned out a bunch of instruments for my high school kiddos, just that way they can have them in their houses over the next few months since we're not sure. Struggling with controlling mallets 1 and 4, what advice can I give you? I think that a lot of things for controlling that, it relates to how you bend your hand. One, there's a lot of strength that has to be built in those back 2 fingers. All right, these are your 2 weakest fingers in your hands just physiologically. So just hold on to those, like hold on to them, start playing, work on double verticals. That's going to be the thing that's going to build your most muscle mass more quickly. I think then after we get that, maybe step into some single alternating strokes. So we can get into some more stroke type stuff later, and maybe that can be a totally different thing. But for developing your 4 mallet grip and your 1 and 4 mallets, knowing that you just got to build some strength in those outside guys. So yeah, that's what I've got. Any other questions? Going once, going twice here. Oh yeah, mallet station. Those are a little expensive. I feel like the mallet station ads. Yes, I saw those, but it feels like it was like literally a placemat that you put on a table, and it was like about like that thick, and it was like maybe $60, and it's like a full size marimba. I don't know where that is, so I don't want to like quote, yeah, that's exactly what it is, but I definitely feel like I saw something like that somewhere. So otherwise, thank you guys for joining us. I really, really appreciate you, taking the time to be here and kind of, learn with us and get some info. If you have any more questions, you can find our emails on the Crown website or kind of ask for those on the Facebook page. We'll be more than happy to give them to you. But again, thank you all for being with us. And I think that's all for the evening. Paul, if you got anything else, I'm good otherwise.
No, just thanks so much for your time, everyone.
Awesome. Have a great night.